The book of Asher, we're continuing on, starting with chapter 66 through 70. Chapter 66 goes over Pharaoh decrees that every male child born in Israel shall be killed, and still they increase. Chapter 67 goes over Aaron is born on account of Pharaoh's decree. Many of the sons of Israel live apart from their wives. The king counselors devised another plan to lessen the number of Israel by drowning them. Chapter 68 goes over Moses, a child of promise, is born. The Egyptian women acting as spies. Moses is discovered and placed by his mother in an ark of bulrushes. Chapter 69 goes over Pharaoh proclaims that if any of the Israelites are short in their labor, either in brick or mortar, his youngest son shall be put in their place. In chapter 70 goes over Moses put the king's crown upon his head. Balaam and the wise men make this a pretext against him. And starting with chapter 66, here we go. At that time died Hadad, the son of Bedad, king of Edom, and Samlah from Mesrekah, from the country of the children of the east, reigned in his place. In the 13th year of the reign of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, which was the 125th year of the Israelites going down into Egypt, Samlah was reigned over Edom 18 years. And when he reigned, he drew forth his host to go and fight against Zepho, the son of Eliphaz, and the children of Chittim, because they had made war against Angeas, king of Africa, and they destroyed his whole army. But he did not engage with him, for the children of Esau prevented him, saying he was their brother. So Samlah listened to the voice of the children of Esau, and turned back with all his forces to the land of Edom, and did not proceed to fight against Zepho, the son of Eliphaz. And Pharaoh, king of Egypt, heard this thing, saying, Samlah, king of Edom, has resolved to fight the children of Chittim, and afterward he will come to fight against Egypt. And when the Egyptians heard this matter, they increased the labor upon the children of Israel, lest the Israelites should do unto them as they did unto them in their war with the children of Esau in the days of Hadad. So the Egyptians said unto the children of Israel, Hasten and do your work, and finish your task, and strengthen the land, lest the children of Esau, your brethren, should come to fight against us, for on your account will they come against us. And the children of Israel did the work of them of Egypt day by day, and the Egyptians afflicted the children of Israel in order to lessen them in the land. But as the Egyptians increased the labor upon the children of Israel, so did the children of Israel increase and multiply, and all Egypt was filled with the children of Israel. And in 125th year of Israel going down into Egypt, all the Egyptians saw that their counsel did not succeed against Israel, but that they increased and grew, and the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen were filled with the children of Israel. So all the elders of Egypt and its wise men came before the king, and bowed down to him, and sat before him. And all the elders of Egypt and the wise men thereof said unto the king, May the king live forever, though this counsel us the counsel against the children of Israel, and we did unto them according to the word of the king. But in proportion to the increase of the labor, so do they increase and grow in the land, and behold, the whole country is filled with them. Now therefore, our Lord and King, the eyes of Egypt are upon thee, to give them advice with thy wisdom, by which they may prevail over Israel, to destroy them, or to diminish them from the land. And the king answered them, saying, Give you counsel in this matter, that we may know what to do unto them. And an officer, one of the king's counselors, whose name was Job, from Mesopotamia in the land of Uz, answered the king, saying, If it please the king, let him hear the counsel of his servant. And the king said unto him, Speak. And Job spoke before the king, the princes, and before all the elders of Egypt, saying, Behold, the counsel of the king, which he advised formerly respecting the labor of the children of Israel, is very good, and you must not remove from them that labor forever. But this is the advice counsel by which you may lessen them, if it seem good to the king to afflict them. Behold, we have feared war for a long time, and we said, When Israel becomes fruitful in the land, they will drive us from the land if a war should take place. If it please the king, let a royal decree go forth, and let it be written in the laws of Egypt, which shall not be revoked, that every male child born to the Israelites, his blood shall be spilled upon the ground. And by your doing this, when all the male children of Israel shall have died, the evil of their wars will cease. Let the king do so, and send for all the Hebrew midwives, and order them in this matter to execute it. So the thing pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Job. This Job is not the same Job in the Bible that Yah called his humble servant. Verse 23. And the king sent for the Hebrew midwives to be called, of which the name of one was Sephra, and the name of another Puah. And the midwives came before the king and stood in his presence. And the king said unto them, When you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then shall she live. But if you will not do this thing, when will I burn you up and all your houses with fire? But the midwives feared mighty God Ahiah, and did not hearken to the king of Egypt, nor to his words. And when the Hebrew women brought forth to the midwife son or daughter, then did the midwife do all that was necessary to the child, and let it live. Thus did the midwives all the days. And this thing was told to the king, and he sent and called for the midwives, and he said to them, Why have you done this thing, and have saved the children alive? And the midwives answered and spoke together before the king, saying, Let not the king think that the Hebrew women are as the Egyptian women, for all the children of Israel are hale, and before the midwife comes to them, they are delivered. And as for us, thy handmaids, for many days no Hebrew woman has brought forth upon us, for all the Hebrew women are their own midwives, because they are hale. And Pharaoh heard their words, and believed them in this matter. And the midwives went away from the king, and mighty God Ahiah dealt well with them, and the people multiplied and waxed exceedingly. Chapter 67. There was a man in the land of Egypt, of the seed of Levi, whose name was Amram, the son of Kehath, the son of Levi, the son of Israel. And this man went and took a wife, namely Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, his father's sister, and she was 126 years old, and he came unto her. And the woman conceived and bare a daughter, and she called her name Miriam, because in those days the Egyptians had embittered the lives of the children of Israel. And she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Aaron. For in the days of her conception, Pharaoh began to spill the blood of the male children of Israel. In those days died Zepho, the son of Eliphaz, the son of Esau, king of Chittim, and Janaz reigned in his stead. And the time that Zepho reigned over the children of Chittim was 50 years, and he died and was buried in the city of Nabna in the land of Chittim. And Janaz, one of the mighty men of the children of Chittim, reigned after him, and he reigned 50 years. And it was after the death of the king of Chittim that Balaam, the son of Beor, fled from the land of Chittim, and he went and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh's king of Egypt. And Pharaoh received him with great honor, for he had heard of the wisdom, and he gave him presents, and made him for a counselor, and agronized him. And Balaam dwelt in Egypt in honor with all the nobles of the king, and the nobles exalted him, because they all coveted to learn his wisdom. And in the 130th year of Israel, going down to Egypt, Pharaoh dreamed that he was sitting upon his kingly throne, and lifted up his eyes, and saw an old man standing before him, and there was scales in his hand of the old man, such scales as are used by merchants. And the old man took the scales, and hung them before Pharaoh. And the old man took all the elders of Egypt, and all his nobles and great men, and he tied them together, and put them in one scale. And he took a milk kid, and put it into the other scale, and the kid preponderated over all. And Pharaoh was astonished at this dreadful vision, why the kid should preponderate over all. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And Pharaoh rose up early in the morning and called all his servants and related to them the dream, and the men were greatly afraid. And the king said to all his wise men, Interpret, I pray you, the dream which I dreamed, that I may know it. And Balaam the son of Beor answered the king and said unto him, This means nothing else but a great evil that will spring up against Egypt in the latter days. For a son will be born to Israel who will destroy all Egypt and its inhabitants and bring forth the Israelites from Egypt with a mighty hand. Now therefore, O king, take counsel upon this matter, that you may destroy the hope of the children of Israel and their expectation before the evil arise against Egypt. And the king said unto Balaam, And what shall we do unto Israel? Surely after a certain manner did we at first counsel against them, and could not prevail over them. Now therefore give you also advice against them, by which we may prevail over them. And Balaam answered the king, saying, Send now and call thy 2 counselors, and we will see what their advice is upon this matter, and afterward thy servant will speak. And the king sent and called his 2 counselors, Ruel the Midianite and Job the Uzite, and they came and sat before the king. And the king said unto them, Behold, you have both heard the dream which I have dreamed, and the interpretation thereof. Now therefore give counsel, and know, and see what is to be done in the children of Israel, whereby we may prevail over them before their evil shall spring up against us. And Ruel the Midianite answered the king and said, May the king live forever. If it seem good to the king, let him desist from the Hebrews, and leave them, and let him not stretch forth his hand against them. For these are they whom mighty God Ahiah chose in days of old, and took as the lot of his inheritance from amongst all the nations of the earth, and the kings of the earth, and who is there that stretched his hand against them with impunity, of whom their God was not avenged? Surely thou knowest that when Abraham went down to Egypt, Pharaoh, the former king of Egypt, saw Sarah his wife, and took her for a wife, because Abraham said, She is my sister, for he was afraid lest the men of Egypt should slay him on account of his wife. And when the king of Egypt had taken Sarah, then mighty God Ahiah smote him and his household with heavy plagues, until he restored unto Abraham his wife Sarah. Then was he healed. And Abimelech the Gerite, king of the Philistines, mighty God Ahiah punished on account of Sarah, wife of Abraham, in stopping up every wound from man to beast. When their mighty God Ahiah came to Abimelech in the dream of night, and terrified him, in order that he might restore to Abraham Sarah, whom he had taken, and afterward all the people of Gerar were punished on account of Sarah. And Abraham prayed to his God for them, and he was entreated of him, and he healed them. And Abimelech feared all this evil that came upon him and his people, and he returned to Abraham his wife Sarah, and gave him with her many gifts. He did so also to Isaac when he had driven him from Gerar, and mighty God Ahiah had done wonderful things to him, that all the water courses of Gerar were dried up, and their productive trees did not bring forth, until Abimelech of Gerar and Ahazath, one of his friends, and Pico, the captain of his host, went to him, and they bent and bowed down before him to the ground. And they requested of him to supplicate for them, and he prayed to mighty God Ahiah for them, and mighty God Ahiah was entreated of him, and he healed them. And Jacob also, the plain man, was delivered through his integrity from the hand of his brother Esau, and the hand of Laban the Syrian, his mother's brother, who had sought his life, likewise from the hand of all the kings of Canaan, who had come together against him and his children to destroy them. And mighty God Ahiah delivered them out of the hands of they turned upon them and smote them, for who had ever stretched forth his hand against them with impunity? Surely Pharaoh the former, thy father's father, raised Joseph the son of Jacob above all the princes of the land of Egypt, when he saw his wisdom, for through the wisdom he rescued all the inhabitants of the land from the famine. And afterward which he ordered Jacob and his children to come down to Egypt, in order that through their virtue the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen might be delivered from the famine. Now therefore, if it seem good in thy eyes, cease from destroying the children of Israel. But if it be not thy will that they shall dwell in Egypt, send them forth from here, that they may go to the land of Canaan, the land where their ancestors sojourned. And when Pharaoh heard the words of Jethro, he was very angry with him, so that he rose with shame from the king's presence, and went to Midian, his land, and took Joseph's stick with him. And the king said to Job the Uzite, What sayest thou, Job, and what is thy advice respecting the Hebrews? So Job said to the king, Behold, all the inhabitants of the land are in thy power. Let the king do as it seem good in his eyes. And the king said unto Balaam, What dost thou say, Balaam? Speak thy word, that we may hear it. And Balaam said to the king, Of all that the king has counseled against the Hebrews, will they be delivered, and the king will not be able to prevail over them with any counsel. For if thou thinkest to lessen them by the flaming fire, thou canst not prevail over them. For surely their mighty God Ahiah delivered Abraham their father from Ur of the Chaldeans, and if thou thinkest to destroy them with a sword, surely Isaac their father was delivered from it, and a ram was placed in his stead. And if with hard and rigorous labor thou thinkest to lessen them, thou wilt not prevail even in this, for their father Jacob served Laban in all manner of hard work and prospered. Now therefore, O king, hear my words, for this is the counsel which is counselled against them, by which thou wilt prevail over them, and from which thou shouldest not depart. If it please the king, let him order all their children which shall be born from this day forward to be thrown into the water, for by this canst thou wipe away their name. For none of them nor of their father were tried in this manner. And the king heard the words of Balaam, and the thing pleased the king, and the princes and the kings did according to the word of Balaam. And the king ordered a proclamation to be issued, and a law to be made throughout the land of Egypt, saying, Every male child born to the Hebrews from this day forward shall be thrown into the water. And Pharaoh called unto all his servants, saying, Go now and seek throughout the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel are, and see that every son born to the Hebrews shall be cast into the river, but every daughter you shall let live. And when the children of Israel heard this thing, which Pharaoh had commanded to cast their male children into the river, some of the people separated from their wives, and others adhered to them. And from that day forward, when the time of the delivery arrived to those women of Israel who had remained with their husbands, they went to the field to bring forth there, and they brought forth in the field, and let their children upon the field, and returned home. And mighty God Ahiah, who had sworn to their ancestors to multiply them, sent one of his ministering angels, which are in heaven, to wash each child in water, to anoint and swab it, and to put into its hands 2 smooth stones, from one of which is sucked milk, and from the other honey. And he caused its hair to grow to its knees, by which it might cover itself, to comfort it, and to cleave to it, through his compassion for it. And when mighty God Ahiah had compassion over them, and had desired to multiply them upon the face of the land, he ordered his earth to receive them, to be preserved therein till the time of their growing up, after which the earth opened its mouth and vomited them forth, and they sprouted forth from the city like the herb of the earth, and the grass of the forest, and they returned each to his family, and to his father's house, and they remained with them. And the babes of the children of Israel were upon the earth like the herb of the field, through God's grace to them. And when all the Egyptians saw this thing, they went forth each to his field with his yoke of oxen, and he plowshared, and they plowed it upon as one plowed the earth at seed time. And when they plowed, they were unable to hurt the infants of the children of Israel, so the children increased and waxed exceedingly. And Pharaoh ordered his officers daily to go to Goshen to seek for the babes of the children of Israel. And when they had sought and fought one, they took it from its mother's bosom by force and threw it into the river. But the female child they left with its mother. Thus did the Egyptians do to the Israelites all the days. Chapter 68. And it was at the time the spirit of mighty God Ahiah was upon Miriam, the daughter of Amram, the sister of Aaron, and she went forth and prophesied about the house, saying, Behold, a son will be born unto us from my father and mother this time, and he will save Israel from the hand of Egypt. And when Amram heard the words of his daughter, he went and took his wife back to the house, and after he had driven her away at the time when Pharaoh ordered every male child of the house of Jacob to be thrown into the water. So Amram took Jochebed, his wife, 3 years after he had driven her away, and he came to her, and she conceived. And at the end of 7 months from her conception she brought forth a son, and the whole house was filled with great light, as of the light of the sun and moon at the time of their shining. And when the woman saw the child that it was good and pleasing to the sight, she hid it for 3 months in an inner room. In those days the Egyptians conspired to destroy all the Hebrew there. And the Egyptian women went to Goshen, where the children of Israel were, and they carried their young ones upon their shoulders, their babes, who could not yet speak. And in those days, when the women of the children of Israel brought forth, each woman had hidden her son from before the Egyptians, that the Egyptians might not know of their bringing forth, and might not destroy them from the land. And the Egyptian women came to Goshen, and their children who could not speak were upon their shoulders. And when an Egyptian woman came into the house of a Hebrew woman, her babe began to cry. And when it cried, the child that was in the inner room answered it. So the Egyptian women went and told it at the house of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh sent his officers to take the children and slay them. Thus did the Egyptians to the Hebrew women all the days. And it was at the time, about 3 months from Jochebed's concealment of her son, that the thing was known in Pharaoh's house. And the woman hastened to take away her son before the officers came, and she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister Miriam stood afar off to know what would be done to him, and what would become of her words. And mighty God Ahiah sent forth at that time a terrible heat in the land of Egypt, which burned up the flesh of man like the sun in its circuit, and it greatly oppressed the Egyptians. And all the Egyptians went down to bathe in the river on account of the consuming heat, which burned up their flesh. And Bathia, the daughter of Pharaoh, went also to bathe in the river, owing to the consuming heat, and her maidens walked at the riverside, and all the women of Egypt as well. And Bathia lifted up her eyes to the river, and she saw the ark upon the water, and sent her maid to fetch it. And she opened it and saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him, and she said, This is one of the Hebrew children. And all the women of Egypt walking on the river side desired to give him suck, but he would not suck, for this thing was from mighty God Ahiah, in order to restore him to his mother's breast. And Miriam his sister was at that time amongst the Egyptian women at the riverside, and she saw this thing, and she said to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and fetch a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the young woman went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to Jochebed, Take this child away and suckle it for me, and I will pay thee thy wages, 2 bits of silver daily. And the woman took the child and nursed it. And at the end of 2 years, when the child grew up, she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh, and he was unto her as a son, and she called his name Moses, for she said, Because I drew him out of the water. And Amram his father called his name Jabbar, for he said it was for him that he associated with his wife whom he had turned away. And Jochebed his mother called his name Jekuthiel, because she said, I have hoped for him to the Almighty, and God restore him unto me. And Miriam his sister called him Jared, for she descended after him to the river to know what his end would be. And Aaron his brother called his name Abi Zanuk, saying, My father left my mother and returned to her on this account. And Kehad, the father of Amram, called his name Abigador, because on his account did mighty God Ahiah repair the breach of the house of Jacob, that they could no longer throw their male children into the water. And their nurse called him Abba Soko, saying, In his tabernacle was he hidden for 3 months on account of the children of Ham. And all Israel called his name Shemaiah, son of Nathaniel, for they said, In his days has mighty God Ahiah heard their cries, and rescued them from their oppression. And Moses was in Pharaoh's house, and was upon Bathia, Pharaoh's daughter, as a son, and Moses grew up amongst the king's children. Chapter 69. And the king of Edom died in those days, in the 18th year of his reign, and was buried in his temple which he had built for himself as his royal residence in the land of Edom. And the children of Esau sent to Pethor, which is upon the river, and they fetched from there a young man of a beautiful eyes and comely aspect, whose name was Saul, and they made him king over them in the place of Samlah. And Saul reigned over all the children of Esau in the land of Edom for 40 years. And when Pharaoh king of Egypt saw that the counsel which Balaam had advised respecting the children of Israel did not succeed, but they were fruitful, multiplied, and increased throughout the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh commanded in those days that a proclamation should be issued throughout Egypt to the children of Israel, saying, No man shall diminish anything of his daily labor. And the man who shall be found deficient in his labor, which he performs daily, whether in mortar or in brick, then his youngest son shall be put in their place. And the labor of Egypt strengthened upon the children of Israel in those days. And behold, if one brick was deficient in any man's daily labor, the Egyptians took his youngest boy by force from his mother, and put him into the building in the place of the brick which his father had left wanting. And the men of Egypt did so to all the children of Israel day by day, all the days for a long period. But the tribe of Levi did not at that time work with the Israelites, their brethren, from the beginning, for the children of Levi knew the cunning of the Egyptians, which they exercised at first toward the Israelites. Chapter 70, the last chapter for today. And in the 3rd year from the birth of Moses, Pharaoh was sitting at a banquet, with Alperaneth, the queen, was sitting at his right, and Bathia at his left. And the lad Moses was lying upon her bosom. And Balaam the son of Beor, with his 2 sons, and all the princes of the king, were sitting at table in the king's presence. And the lad stretched forth his hand upon the king's head, and took the crown from the king's head, and placed it on his own head. And when the king and princes saw the work which the boy had done, the king and the princes were terrified, and one man to his neighbor expressed astonishment. And the king said unto the princes who were before him at table, What speak you, and what say you, O ye princes, in this matter? And what is to be the judgment against the boy on account of this act? And Balaam the son of Beor, the magician, answered before the king and princes, and he said, Remember now, O my lord and king, the dream which thou didst dream many days since, and that which thy servant interpreted unto thee. Now therefore this is a child from the Hebrew children, in whom in the spirit of mighty God Ahiah, in whom in the spirit of mighty God Ahiah, and let not my lord the king imagine that this youngster did this thing without knowledge. For he is a Hebrew boy, and wisdom and understanding are with him, although he is yet a child, and with wisdom as he done this and chosen unto himself the kingdom of Egypt. For this is the manner of all the Hebrews, to deceive kings and their nobles, to do all these things cunningly, in order to make the king of the earth and their men tremble. Surely thou knowest that Abraham their father acted thus, whom deceived the army of Nimrod, king of Babel, and Abimelech, king of Gerar, and that he possessed himself of the land of the children of Heth, and all the kingdoms of Canaan. And that the descendants into Egypt, and said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister, in order to mislead Egypt and her king. His son Isaac also did so when he went to Gerar and dwelt there, and his strength prevailed over the army of Abimelech, king of the Philistines. He also thought of making the king of the Philistines stumble, in saying that Rebekah his wife was his sister. Jacob also dwelt treacherously with his brother, and took from him hand his birthright and his blessing. He went then to Padam Aram, to the house of Laban his mother's brother, and cunningly obtained from him his daughter, his cattle, and all belonging to him, and fled away, and returned to the land of Canaan to his father. His sons sold their brother Joseph, who went down into Egypt, and became a slave, and was placed in the prison house for 12 years, until the former Pharaoh dreamed dreams, and withdrew him from the prison house, and magnified him above all the princes of Egypt, on account of his interpreting his dream to him. And when mighty God Ahiah caused a famine throughout the land, he sent for and brought his father and all his brothers, and the whole of his father's household, and supported them without price or reward, and brought the Egyptians for slaves. Now therefore, my lord king, behold, this child has risen up in their stead in Egypt, to do according to their deeds, and to trifle with every king, prince, and judge. If it please the king, let us now spill his blood upon the ground, lest he grow up and take away the government from thy hand, and the hope of Egypt perish after he shall have reigned. And Balaam said to the king, let us moreover call for all the judges of Egypt, and the wise men thereof, and let us know if the judgment of death is due to this boy, as thou didst say, and then we will slay him. And Pharaoh sent and called for all the wise men of Egypt, and they came before the king. And an angel of mighty God Ahiah came amongst them, and he was like one of the wise men of Egypt. And the king said to the wise men, surely you have heard that what this Hebrew boy who is in the house has done, and thus has Balaam judged in this matter. Now judge you also, and see what is due to the boy for the act that he has committed. And the angel, who seemed like one of the wise men of Pharaoh, answered and said as follows, before all the wise men of Egypt, and before the king and the princes, if it please the king, let the king send for men who shall bring before him an onyx stone and a coal of fire, and place them before the child. And if the child shall stretch forth his hand and take the onyx stone, then shall we know that with wisdom has the youth done all that he has done, and we must slay him. But if he stretch forth his hand upon the coal, then shall we know that it was not with knowledge that he did this thing, and he shall live. And the thing seemed good in the eyes of the king and the prince, so the king did according to the word of the angel of mighty God Ahiah. And the king ordered the onyx stone and the coal to be brought and placed before Moses. And they placed the boy before them, and the lad endeavored to stretch forth his hand to the onyx stone, but the angel of mighty God Ahiah took his hand and placed it upon the coal, and the coal became extinguished in his hand, and he lifted it up and put it into his mouth, and burned part of his lips and part of his tongue, and he became heavy in mouth and tongue. And when the king and princes saw this, they knew that Moses had not acted with wisdom in taking off the crown from the king's head. So the king and princes refrained from slaying the child. So Moses remained in Pharaoh's house growing up, and mighty God Ahiah was with him. And whilst the boy was in the king's house, he was robed in purple, and he grew amongst the children of the king. And when Moses grew up in the king's house, Bathia, the daughter of Pharaoh, considered him as a son, and all the household of Pharaoh honored him, and all the men of Egypt were afraid of him. And he daily went forth and came into the land of Goshen, where his brethren and children of Israel were. And Moses saw them daily in shortness of breath and hard labor. And Moses asked him, saying, Wherefore is this labor meted out unto you day by day? And they told him all that had befallen them, and all the injunctions which Pharaoh had put upon them before his birth. And they told him all the counsels which Balaam the son of Beor had counseled against them, and what he had also counseled against him, in order to slay him when he had taken the king's crown from off his head. And when Moses heard these things, his anger was kindled against Balaam, and he sought to kill him, and he was in ambush for him day by day. And Balaam was afraid of Moses, and he and his 2 sons rose up and went forth from Egypt, and they fled and delivered their souls, and betook themselves to the land of Cush, to Kikianus, king of Cush. And Moses was in the king's house, going out and coming in. And mighty God Ahiah gave him favor in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all the servants, and in the eyes of all the people of Egypt. And they loved Moses exceedingly. And the day arrived when Moses went to Goshen to see his brethren, that he saw the children of Israel in their burdens and hard labor, and Moses was grieved on their account. And Moses returned to Egypt, and came to the house of Pharaoh, and came before the king, and Moses bowed down before the king. And Moses said unto Pharaoh, I pray thee, my lord, I have come to seek a small request from thee. Turn not away my face empty. And Pharaoh said unto him, Speak. And Moses said unto Pharaoh, Let there be given unto thy servant the children of Israel, who are in Goshen, one day to rest therein from their labor. And the king answered Moses and said, Behold, I have lifted up thy face in this thing to grant thy request. And Pharaoh ordered a proclamation to be issued throughout Egypt and Goshen, saying, To you all the children of Israel, thus says the king, for 6 days you shall do your work and labor, but on the 7th day you shall rest, and shall not perform any work. Thus shall you do all the days, as the king and Moses the son of Bathia have commanded. And Moses rejoiced at this thing which the king had granted to him, and all the children of Israel did as Moses ordered. For this thing was from mighty God Ahiah to the children of Israel, for mighty God Ahiah had begun to remember the children of Israel, to save them from the sake of their fathers. And mighty God Ahiah was with Moses, and his fame went throughout Egypt. And Moses became great in the eyes of all the Egyptians, and the eyes of all the children of Israel, seeking good from his people Israel, and speaking words of peace regarding them to the king. And that's the end of chapter 70 for today. Thank you for listening.